So, listen to this. Kai Havertz is one of the few players who can drop a quiet performance, and somehow the headlines still read like he's a misunderstood genius. They call him versatile, intelligent, essential. Yet ask 10 people what his actual position is, and you'll get 10 different answers. That's the contradiction. Not that he's bad, but that the story around him is clearer than his role on the pitch. This case file isn't about whether Kai Havertz is talented. That question was answered years ago, long before the transfer fees, the debates, and the noise. The real question is why, at every major stage of his career, the conversation around him has felt more carefully constructed than his footballing role itself. Somewhere between Leverkusen, Chelsea, and now Arsenal, Havertz became something more than a player. He became a narrative, a symbol that needed to work even when the evidence was unclear. When performances dipped, explanations arrived instantly. When positions changed, confusion was reframed as intelligence. And when doubts surfaced, they were often treated as misunderstanding rather than valid critique. This case file isn't here to expose a fraud or defend a misunderstood star. It's here to examine what happens when modern football needs a story more than it needs clarity. Because once a narrative takes hold, the player inside it may no longer be judged by the same rules as everyone else. Before the noise, before the labels, before the need to explain him away, Kai Havertz existed in a system that didn't need defending. At Bayer Leverkusen, his role was not a debate, it was defined. He wasn't described as versatile because versatility wasn't required. He operated between lines, arriving late into the box, reading space rather than fighting for it. The structure around him was built to highlight timing, not physical dominance. And because of that clarity, his football spoke for itself. Goals came naturally. Influence was visible without being narrated. The media, at that point, didn't need to protect him. They didn't need metaphors or abstract praise. The discussion was simple. This was a gifted young attacker growing inside a system that understood him. What matters here isn't nostalgia or numbers, it's contrast. At Leverkusen, Havertz was evaluated through function. You could explain what he did, where he operated, and why it worked. There was no urgency to frame his performances as something deeper or hidden. No insistence that critics didn't understand football. The clarity of his role made judgment straightforward, and that clarity would quietly disappear the moment expectation, price, and narrative entered the picture. Chelsea was where clarity stopped being a requirement. From the moment Havertz arrived in London, his role was no longer something to be defined first and judged later. It was something to be explained in real time. He was introduced as a solution before anyone had agreed on the problem. A record signing, a Champions League winner in waiting, a player who could be many things at once. And so he became exactly that. Many things, rarely the same thing twice. False nine one week, attacking midfielder the next, sometimes a striker by necessity, sometimes an interior eight by theory. Each change was framed as adaptability, never uncertainty. This was also where the language around him began to shift. Performances were no longer described in concrete terms. Instead of what he created or failed to create, the focus moved to what he enabled. His movement, his intelligence, his ability to open space for others. When goals didn't come, context arrived immediately. A new system, a new coach, a new role, and crucially, a new explanation that arrived faster than criticism ever could. Other players at Chelsea were measured by output. Havertz was measured by interpretation. What's important here is not that those explanations were false. Some of them were valid, but the pattern mattered. He was rarely allowed to simply underperform. Every quiet game came with a pre-written defense. Slowly, almost invisibly, the narrative became stronger than the role itself. By the time Chelsea moved on, the question was no longer, did this work? It was, did we ever really understand him in the first place? And that question would follow him to his next club, dressed in different colors, but carrying the same uncertainty. Here's the moment where the case file turns. Because the issue with Kai Havertz was never that he escaped criticism entirely. It's that he was rarely judged on the same terms as everyone else. When other attacking players struggled, the conversation narrowed. Missed chances, lost duels, lack of impact. With Havertz, the conversation widened. It became philosophical. His value was said to exist between moments, beyond statistics, in areas that only careful observers could supposedly see. And once football discourse reaches that point, clarity becomes optional. This is where protection quietly replaces evaluation. Not because the media is malicious, but because once a player is framed as complex, every failure can be reinterpreted as misunderstanding. The absence of a fixed role is no longer a problem. It becomes proof of intelligence. Inconsistency is reframed as sacrifice, and doubt, instead of being explored, is dismissed as impatience. The result is subtle but powerful. Havertz isn't argued to be good or bad. He's argued to be above simple judgment. And that's the real twist, because protection doesn't always help a player. Sometimes it traps them. Without a clear standard to meet, there's nothing solid to fail or succeed against. The goalposts move every week, and so does the explanation. Over time, the question shifts from how should this player be used to why does this player always need explaining? That's not a personal criticism, it's a structural one. And once you see it, it's impossible to ignore.
Arsenal didn't inherit Kai Havertz as a problem to solve. They inherited him as a story to rewrite. From the first weeks, the framing was different. This wasn't about finding his best position anymore. It was about redefining his purpose. He was no longer the misunderstood technician or the awkward false nine. He became the symbol of tactical maturity, pressing intelligence, physical commitment, big game presence. A player who does the things that don't show up on the stat sheet. And in many ways, this narrative fit Arsenal's moment perfectly. A young team, a clear project, a manager praised for structure and discipline. Havertz slotted into that story almost too smoothly. When he struggled, the explanation was already there. He was learning the system. He was sacrificing for balance. He was unlocking others. When he scored in key moments, those goals didn't just count as goals. They were treated as a validation of the entire idea, proof that patience had been right all along. But the central question never really disappeared. Was Havertz finally being used in a role that maximized him, or was he simply protected by a cleaner narrative than before? The standards still felt different. Contribution was discussed more than influence, interpretation more than evidence. Arsenal may have given him stability, but they also gave the story around him new confidence. And confidence, when shared by media and club alike, can be just as powerful as clarity, sometimes more so.
Modern football doesn't just sell results, it sells meaning. Clubs sell projects, managers sell ideas, media sells stories that make complex systems feel human. And in that ecosystem, players like Kai Havertz become especially valuable, not just for what they do on the pitch, but for what they represent off it. He fits the profile perfectly. Educated, articulate, tactically flexible. A player who can be explained, defended, and reframed without ever sounding like an excuse. When football needs stories, ambiguity becomes an asset. A clearly defined player invites clear judgment. A blurred one invites interpretation. And interpretation creates endless content. Debates, analysis, podcasts, think pieces. Havertz isn't alone in this. He's part of a broader pattern where certain players are elevated into narratives that protect them from simple evaluation, not because they're undeserving, but because the system benefits from complexity. It keeps conversations alive. It keeps hope intact. The danger is that once a narrative becomes essential, criticism starts to feel disruptive rather than necessary. Questioning the story is framed as ignorance. Doubt is treated as negativity. And gradually, the line between analysis and loyalty disappears. The player doesn't just perform inside the system anymore. He becomes a pillar of its identity. At that point, football isn't asking whether the role makes sense. It's asking whether the story can survive without him.
So this case file doesn't end with a verdict. It can't. Because Kai Havertz isn't a failed experiment or a misunderstood genius. He's something more revealing than that. He's a mirror, a reflection of how modern football chooses comfort over clarity and explanation over evaluation. At every stage of his career, the question has never fully been about what he produces. It's been about how much meaning we're willing to assign to it. Maybe the media protected him because they believed in him. Maybe clubs framed him carefully because they needed him to work. Or maybe, somewhere along the way, the story became more important than the football itself. That's the question worth sitting with. Not whether Havertz is good enough, but whether any player can truly be judged fairly once a narrative decides who they are supposed to be. So now, it's your turn. When you watch Kai Havertz play, what are you actually seeing? A player performing a role or a story being upheld? Pick a side.